So what's so interesting about foreign policy and how it actually marries with domestic policy is we see that same security buildup that's happening overseas. We're seeing that type of same sentiment inside of our domestic affairs when we think about the State of the Union address, where President Biden openly said we should not defund the police, but we need to fund the police. Well, fundamentally, what does that mean? Defund the police may not be a great slogan to have. However, what it essentially meant was to reallocate funding from certain things that we use, such as military equipment, put more money into training for police officers on our domestic affairs. But when we think about that and its major impact to civil society, that's the state's response to civil discourse today. The last time we had a scenario like that was during the civil rights movement. Prior to that, we saw that same situation during the rebellions from Nat Turner. Even go back to as far as the 1676 from the Bacon Rebellion, Nathan Bacon, that rebellion against the British government. We see that in democracies all across the world. So it's not just uniquely American. This is a sentiment that I think that is kind of like a train that's been escalating for a while. Think back Brexit. That was in Europe. The year after Brexit happened, the election of President Trump. Well, what happened prior to that, 2008? President Obama's election was a response to the status quo. Prior to that, we seen the election of Modi. We seen over in India. We seen the election of Duterte over in Brazil. We seen the election of all these other dictators and strong men that were quite different from the status quo. So these foreign implications have very much a great impact on what's happened domestically. It's just an expression of it. So just a couple examples of what makes America great. One, America happened to be a nation that was born, it was birthed in the entire setup of rebellion. Rebellion against a British state, British government. But the irony in that is, what a lot of history books don't teach us is that these weren't just like white men that came from Europe that were actually fighting this war. When we think about some of the first people who were supplying General Pierre, black man, supplying intelligence to George Washington at that time, when you look at some of the founding fathers and the pictures and the imagery that was put out there, these weren't just white men, these were black men. An exceptional moment in American history was the ending of World War II. And when you really think about it and put it in context, it wasn't until America got involved in World War I and World War II where we instantly just kind of put these wars to bed. And we always rose the victor in all of those. We haven't had a time like that in world history where one nation actually was able to kind of influence the total trajectory of humankind at that point, because he was the most bloody and most deadly wars at the time. One nation, small nation, very new nation on the global stage was able to impact that type of behavior of a global population. American exceptionalism, an example of that was the fact that we led the creation of the United Nations. We led that coalition. That coalition. Prior to that, there were some attempts, but never a nation that can actually pull such an institution off and have it survive as long as it survived. We're 82 years into having an institution structured like that. This is something that the world has never seen. And I think that it's because of this openness that we were able to make these things happen. And I also believe that it's kind of in the American spirit, just that rebellion and going against the grain and just testing the models. I believe that that's what makes us an exceptional nation. I do believe so, because one of the debates prior to Abraham Lincoln's election was a debate and the criticism that was levied on America for its institution of slavery. And that's what led to the debate of the country of whether or not we should abolish slavery. That's what led to our Civil War. I think that a nation that's willing to look at itself, recognize its wrongs, its original sins, and actually make efforts to move towards that way, I think that right there, it does, that shows not just the strength of our diversity, but it also shows the character of a nation. So the term "people of color" is actually an elite term that they use in circles, and I happen to be from those same circles. So it's really a criticism about me and my upbringing as well. But people of color is something that the scholars use, and the elites, if you will, use that term. But in all reality, I have so much more in common with my white neighbor than I have with my black friend across the town, because it's really about class. When we really think about it, it's really about class. So when we look and for me, the approach that I take when I go to cast my vote and cast my ballot, quarterly in some cases, depending on who's running for what in my district, is all about what the interest of my actual district is. It's not so much about an identity of race. For me, it's more about the identity of economics and how I identify. Do I want, controlled taxes inside of my neighborhood? Do I want I will always pick the candidate that's making it easier for small businesses to actually get funding, small businesses to actually grow. I always pick the candidate that's going to vote for legislation to put more and appropriate more money into my neighborhood before I vote for the candidate that identifies me by my race. Because I was born black. I know I'm black. There's also such thing as called that they used to call back in the day the Negro elite, if you will. I'm from Atlanta, and that's what they called all the people in our neighborhood, because they were of a certain stature and they went to the HBCUs. And guess what? Didn't like the term, but we understood the implications of it and we wore it proudly. So in civil society, when we think about people of color, if you will, specifically black people, I would say echo the same thing that Dr. Martin Luther King said. Black people should not have a permanent party, but a permanent interest.